Our Reverb 2.0, the do's and the really do's. We're going to give you kind of like a 10,000 foot view of Reverb 2.0 and how to get your current projects into Reverb 2.0. Now, throughout this training, like I said, it's a 10,000 foot view. We want to give you some good tips and tricks about how to do it. But don't think this is the only resource we have for you. We're going to talk a little bit about Study Hall and some of the other resources that we have for you as well while you're going through this. We fully expect you to have questions after this. So a couple things we're going to do is that we're going to record this Power Hour for you. And then we're also going to, the deck that we're using, the SlideShare deck that we're using, we're going to have that posted to SlideShare after, and I will be sending out an email to all of y'all after this training. My name is Christopher Ward. I'm VP of Sales and Marketing. Tony McDowell will actually be our host, and he'll be presenting to you. And we also have Ashton French on the line as well. You may hear from one or all three of us during the presentation. We ask that if you have questions, please put them into the chat. You can do that while Tony is presenting, and either Ashton or myself will get back to you in the chat to answer those questions. But Tony's also going to give you the opportunity to ask questions as well. He'll be pausing throughout the presentation and asking if you have any questions. So please feel free to ask at that time, and he can address those directly for you. Again, thank you for joining, and I hope everybody's safe and healthy. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tony.
Thank you, Christopher. Okay, well, this is a Power Hour, and we're pretty much focusing on Reverb 2.0, the do's and the really do's. So hopefully our goal is to give you some useful information as you're making decisions about going to the cloud or expanding your internet presence. So why Reverb 2.0? Well, let's give it a little history. For about 25 years, we've been working on help technology, whether it's packaged help or whether it's hosted on a website. And during that time, we've had a flagship offering, WebWorks Help, that went through 5 iterations before we moved to Reverb, our first version, which came out about almost 10 years ago. And Reverb 1 was like, that was going to be the end, you know, as far as new formats. You just incrementally go from there, but it turns out with the advent of smartphones and the rapid development in browser technology, the capabilities built into the browsers became more and more sophisticated. And then it became clear that we needed a new format to replace Reverb 1. And so Reverb 2, what it does is it takes advantage of some of the newer features of these browsers. And so I'm going to give you just a couple of pointers on just why it might be worth looking at Reverb 2.0. You may be using Reverb 1 and it's still a supported version, but there are some things about Reverb 2 that are useful. And this kind of give you the things that you really want to do with regards to going to that format. Real quick, I wanted to show you how it benefits you as a content architect or as a technical writer or even as a help packager, and then also look at the benefits for your audience. So let's start with how it benefits you. Well, first of all, unlike Reverb 1, with Reverb 2, we've emphasized the use of Sass technology, which is kind of like an advanced CSS. And with that technology, we're able to provide a lot more richness in the look and feel of the output without much extra work. And so that's really the bottom line, is how to empower you to be able to create rich layout designs with that match your color, logos, and characteristics. So for example, this toolbar at the top, it's composed of vector icons as opposed to image maps, or not maps, but images. So these things can be scaled very easily. So you can now change the size of the toolbar and all the components throughout the entire Reverb 2.0 output without having to do much work. And so really that kind of opens up the opportunity for design. Search indexing outside of your document set. So you may have documents that you're responsible for publishing as part of the manuals, but you may also have content that's either hosted on other web servers, maybe your own web servers, or content that is part of a different file that you're not actually generating. And so we call this Spotlight Search. And so you can now integrate those files and that content. Reverb 1 actually had some of this capability, but we've continued to improve it in Reverb 2. So now you can organize all of your content under one search area. We've improved the analytics. So we're not just measuring page clicks anymore. We're actually measuring feedback using analytics. So now you can have one place to go look at all of the values that are important. So are your end users satisfied with the help they're getting? So now you've got these buttons that you can enable or disable in different places in the output. And you can even customize the colors regarding these buttons. And so to give you an idea of just how much detail there is, even hover colors and highlighting like that are actually controllable now using the Sass technology, bringing that right into your fingertips of the design process. Smaller signature. So just with some of the advances in the browser technology and also, quite frankly, with 10 years of expertise being pushed into it, we're actually able to reduce the signature so that it's faster downloads, better use of your browser's cache. This is actually really valuable. So when your users come the first time, it may have to do a little bit more work, although we've done some things to cleverly hide, where it's downloading the search index. But now the browser kind of helps a lot more because we're taking more efficient use of the cache. And then finally, the other benefit for you is that you're going to have, with Reverb 2, you have an improved content security model. And what that means is, technically what it means is things like JavaScript are placed in safer areas of the output. So and this means your IT department is going to have less work to ensure that what you're putting on your web servers is safe from exploitation. Okay, so now let's look a little bit how it benefits your audience. Easier ways to search. So what we've done is we've said, hey, you may have a lot of manuals compiled into a single output, and your end users may want a way to filter which manuals you perform searches on. So we've integrated that with the toolbar to make it really, really obvious and easy for your users. And then we've also really done a lot of work on the progressive searching. So as soon as they start typing, they'll start to get results quickly, and not only that, they're highlighted results. We've also, the integration, so as your users start searching and they find something they want to look at, they can click on that page, but then they can also come right back to the searching that they were working on and toggle back and forth. So this kind of really, really makes a pleasant experience for the end user, and hopefully they find what they need to find and they're happier as a result. With the cleanups we've done with Reverb 2, a lot of features that you kind of take for granted, like bookmarking, these tend to work a lot smoother than with Reverb 1. So your end users will be able to find pages that they want to bookmark and bookmark them without having to worry about, is it going to go to the right place, or was I searching when I bookmarked it or not? You can actually now bookmark the search terms that you were looking for. Faster search results. The speed of the search has been enhanced significantly. And of course, multi-device support has been improved. Before I dive into the more technical details of Reverb, I want to go ahead and just do a quick 30-second review of the URL. Now I think a lot of folks are thinking more about, well, we got to get our content on our web servers. Packaged help may or may not always apply. So with the internet, we all know that it's composed of a protocol, the HTTP part, a host name, and sometimes a port number. And then what's important to us is the path on that server where it's located. And then finally, there's an entry point file at the end. Usually it's index.html. And then it may or may not have a fragment identifier as well, or usually a hash character. So what does ePublisher generate? It generates a set of folders with a set of files, and all these files and folders have to be deployed to your web server for it to work properly. But really all your end users have to worry about is the entry point file. And in this case, or typically the default case, it's index.html. So let's take a look at what that looks like on your browser. So normally you might have a link to your help set, and really that's really the most important link is the entry point. So that gets you into the contents of the generated output, and with that link your users can navigate to any page or part of the content. However, there's another level to it. It's like, what happens if you want to send them a link to a specific page or load a specific page on demand? So there is a kind of a syntax that has been adopted for Reverb, and it uses the hash character, and so often you'll see things like hash page followed by some kind of directory path followed by a file name, something like that. And you might see other parameters even, like context sensitive link parameter, but I'm not going to get into that in this presentation, but I just wanted you to be comfortable and familiar that really all that's happening here is you're loading the Reverb help set and then giving it some parameters to tell it what content to load as well. Okay, very good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and begin looking at ePublisher. So chances are this is not your first project that you've developed, and maybe you're working with Reverb 1 or a different format. Now you want to look at Reverb 2, but you don't want to have to start from scratch and do all the work over again. And fortunately, it really should not be necessary if you have any ePublisher designer projects that you're working with. So what the basic step is, you'll open up your designer project, and these are always identified with the WEP extension, because that identifies that it is a designer project, is meant to be used when you want to change the design or capability of your output. Because ultimately you're going to use designer to develop a process where your daily writing activities can be published very quickly without having to do any design work. Okay, so I've got a legacy project. It has, in this particular demo case, it has just two targets, a PDF target and a WebWorks Reverb 1 target. So this is a project that does not have Reverb 2 in it. And so I wanted to make that point, because what we're going to do is we're going to add Reverb 2 to this and try to reuse existing work that's already been put into this project without having to redo it. Briefly, I also wanted to mention the start page, which you can see typically it shows up, but if it doesn't show up because you've rearranged it or hidden it, you can always view it from the view menu, just like start page. The start page, the two things that if you're not using that are kind of handy are the recent projects. So it's just a quick list of what you've been working on. You can make this list larger or smaller in the preferences area. And the other area to look at is the news section. And obviously we've all got enough news in our life, we don't need any more. So but one thing to keep an eye out for is when new releases become available. So we'll put a link here to announce that, as well as other things, but this is just another way to make sure you know what's going on over at WebWorks. Okay, and so let's take a look at what we've got here. One of the things you may want to do is you want to open up the Style Designer. And the Style Designer, just a quick review, just allows you to see the styles. It allows you to see the work you've already put into your project with regards to adding a look and feel to your content, as opposed to adding look and feel to your toolbar or the skin of your help. One of the things that makes it easier to work with the Style Designer is to create a preview. So you can create a preview by clicking on a document in the document manager and then selecting the preview button. So now with that preview, I can actually select content in the preview window, and notice how it's now highlighted down here in the Style Designer. So we've got, in this particular case, two styles that have what appear to be customizations. And the reason I know that is because they're bolded. So that's actually a very helpful cue. So you may have inherited a project from somebody else, or you may have done a project that you haven't looked at because you've just been generating for a long time. You haven't looked at what's going on. You've forgotten the layout and structure of it. So here's a quick review. Look for the bolding. The bolding tells you what has been modified. For example, font family and the font weight has been modified on this heading 1. But don't just look at the Properties tab. You also want to look at the options, and more specifically, the target properties and the target options. And these two tabs are really important to take a look at because they have things that apply only to the active target. So right now I have what appears to be a customization to the target options in it, which means it only applies to the reverb. So if I add a new target to this, which I intend to do, this particular setting is not going to carry over, so I will need to recreate it. So I wanted to make that point. Okay, so how to add a target. The first thing you want to do is to check what level the base format version is. So for example, you can always check that by going to the project menu, project settings. And here is the general tab. The compatibility configuration shows you what the base format is. And so you can see all of the legacy versions of ePublisher that have come out over the years. These items in red just simply mean that they're no longer supported directly. Now that doesn't mean we'd ever leave you in a situation where you're stuck on something. It just means that we're going to want to move you to a supported version once you start troubleshooting or making changes and upgrading things to get new features. But really, I recommend anybody that's working on Reverb 2.0, you want to go to the latest version, which is now 2019.2. 2020.1 will be coming out later this year. But until then, 2019.2 is our best version of Reverb 2.0. So definitely want to make sure that version is set. And once you've assured that that's set, you can then go to the Manage Targets menu item, and here you can add a new target. So I'm just going to right away go ahead and add a Reverb 2 target. I'm going to give it a name. For simplicity, I will just call it the format itself. And now I'm still working with WebWorks Reverb, so I need to load the 2.0 target that I just created. And once I do that, I'll have to reset up my display window because that preview was set up for the other target. Okay, well, and at this point I can come down and I can identify my heading. And notice how the target options and the target properties are at the default state. So in this case, I'd want to come down and using what I learned by looking at the Reverb 1 to set the table of contents level there. And so now I'm able to recapture all of the customization in these first two tabs, plus I've re-implemented customizations in the target tabs. And I can save it. And I can do a quick generation. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask in the chat box while this is generating? We've got some experts online that can probably help you with that as well. Okay, now we can, if we like, we can go ahead and take a look at this output. One of the easiest ways to look at it is just to open the file up, and you can do that using a double-click action on the entry point file itself, or you could also launch it using a background miniature web server that we offer as well with ePublisher. I'm just going to keep it simple and just load it straight from the file system. And so you can see you have a very vanilla project. But the nice thing is that it's inherited all of the customizations that were created for the WebWorks Reverb. So really a lot of my work is already done. So I could actually take what I've got now with Reverb 2 and get all the basic functionalities ready to use without doing much work at all. Okay, but chances are you're going to want to do a few things. So that's what I'm going to go over. What are the things that you're going to want to do to get the new Reverb 2 to be equal, at least, and superior to the Reverb 1 implementation that you've had before, or the WebWorks help. Okay, so to do that, we need to start looking at some things, we call them advanced customizations, meaning they're advanced because they don't use the style designer directly. So let's take a look at that. So the advanced customizations use these two menus. And so I'm going to explain these menus, and then I'm going to talk about some target settings before I get in detail on these two menus. So these two menus, the way they work is if you want to apply customizations across all your targets, you can use the format customization. And there's a caveat here with using the format customization, but it could be a big time saver if you have a lot of targets because they will all share the same look and feel and parameters. But the target customizations, if you use those, they supersede the format customization. So they will override it. And they can also be very effective to applying customizations to a specific target. They also are very effective if you're using prepackaged plugins or skins that come with the product. Skins were developed back in WebWorks Help days, but they were carried through to Reverb as a way to reduce the amount of work that you have to do to get a particular look and feel. But there is potentially if long run, you might have to do a little bit more work if you use plugins. But in the short term, they can get you up and moving very fast. So let's take a look at the target settings now. Okay, so the other thing, besides setting the target properties and target options for your styles, you'll also need to set the target settings. And there are quite a few of them, and there's quite a few more than what was available in Reverb 1. And these target settings often, between releases, new things get added. So I want to go through some of the important highlights of the target settings, because you can turn on a lot of functionality without having to do without ever having to touch any CSS. So first of all, analytics. So if you want to turn on the was this helpful buttons, here's where you'll do that. Obviously, you'll put in your Google tracking ID, and then you can determine, do you want to turn on was this helpful buttons for the page content? And we also provide it for the search page as well, because you may want your users to give you feedback on search results. So this could actually be pretty useful to look at what your users are searching for and if they were satisfied with the results that they're getting. Because tunability is another subject for another day, but you could actually tune your search results to make sure you're giving the proper weighting to the proper areas in your documentation. Company information. These are some very common things that most likely you'll want to put into your documentation. Not required, but you'll see in a moment how they can be pretty useful. Okay, so once I enter the company information, actually there is one thing. If you want to put like a logo, the way the images work for this is that we use, right now I don't have any images preloaded. So what I have to do is I would come, I would go to the project directory, and this is a little bit manual, and there's a files folder. And inside this files folder is where you put basically all the images that you might be using in your target settings and in other places as well. So if you have logos and certain files that you want to use in your layout, you can actually copy them into this folder. So let's say, hey, I've got a logo, maybe some bullets and dashes and different things. I can copy these and put them into my project, and so now they'll be available for your in the target settings. So now I can actually choose a logo. Okay, footer. So one of the nice things we've had in the other formats is footers, but we've continued to make it smarter. And with Reverb, Reverb 2, we actually allow you to customize the HTML of the footer very easily. So you can, if you enable it by default, the footer is disabled, but it's very easy to enable it. So if you enable it, you then just need to specify, do you want it at the end of the layout or at the end of the page? So if it's at the end of the layout, the footer will go across the entire bottom section of the output. Pull that up so you can see it. So if I do a footer, and here, this is using the default case, end of layout, so it appears across the entire bottom of the skin. In Reverb 1, we didn't have that capability. The footer would actually just appear at the bottom of the page content. And so that was, there were some users that wanted it across the entire bottom, so now we have that option. Header, same thing, except this time we're allowing you to put a header above the toolbar. So Reverb is kind of greedy. It wants to take up the whole page because it's got to take care of being responsive for small devices. But very often you want to have something above the toolbar. So now we have a way to put an entire user customizable section above the toolbar that can be useful for things like external links, other logos, slogans, phrases, whatever is necessary for your audience to make more use of the help output. So now to get that, you'll need to enable it. By default, it's disabled. And once you enable it, you can then turn on different logos and things. Something else I'll just briefly mention. From time to time, users make a change or come up with an idea, and they bring it to us in support, and we look at the idea and we realize, hey, this is something that users need. We might create a patch for you. Once we decide to commit to putting it to the product, we might give you a patch, but in the next release, we'll actually put it in the product so you can remove that patch. And so this is an example of, for links, we added an ability to preserve links to things like Word files. These are links that these are files that aren't in the project. They're not being generated, but for some reason, let's say you had a form that people need to fill out, you could actually say there's an option, and I'll turn that on so that that Word file, there would be a link to it so they could download it. PDFs are automatically handled, so you don't have to worry about those, but for unknown file types, the unknown meaning that ePublisher doesn't understand how to convert them or manage them, they cannot be preserved. Oh, the other use case is like zip files. So if you have a downloadable package that you want to provide as a zip file. The menu, okay, so the menu is, obviously it's on by default. The menu is, just as review, is what you get when you press this button, or what you may automatically get depending on how you have your settings. You can now decide that, hey, I don't really want a menu to be available. You can turn off the menu. You can also turn off the table of contents. But if you do have a menu, one of the things you'll want to set is you'll want to set the width, the maximum width allowed before. See that right there, what happened, how this side went gray, and that's trying to indicate to you, and you can customize that, by the way, but it's trying to indicate to your audience that they're not able to see the whole content, and they need to click that button to see it. And the reason we do this is because obviously on small devices, there's just going to be, it's going to be difficult to preserve everything at once. But on a desktop, you've got plenty of room. So on a desktop, notice how we change that behavior so we can have both visible, the TOC and the page content side by side. So how do you set that? That is set right here. You set the maximum width or the minimum page width for docked menu. And so what it's basically saying is 900 pixels wide is the minimum width that is allowed to have this menu docked on the side, as opposed to covering a section of the content. The page area. So the page area, we're talking about where your content lives. We've added some nice things like, for example, the last modified date. You can actually put that into your output so that your users can get an idea how fresh the content is. You can turn that by default, it's disabled. And you can turn on some other behaviors, like you could actually put the publish date as well on the page. PDF, this is pretty traditional. Not much new to report here, but as a review, if you want PDFs to be part of your output, you will need to turn them on. Typically, you can turn them on, one for each group or one for each document. Or you can also specify to copy the PDFs from a different target. And this is often used when your PDF is using different conditional settings, so that it's actually different. The PDF content may look a little different from your HTML content. Search, if you're working with really, really large projects, you may want to go to the search area and tune it a little bit. So what do we mean by tuning it? What we mean is, what is the minimum character amount to execute a search? So as you notice here, I need to type a certain number of characters, in this case 4 characters, before the Reverb 2 will actually go and start finding results. And by making that minimum character amount larger, you're going to reduce the amount of internet traffic. And so so if you have a really, really large setup, that might be necessary. Although we found for 98% of the cases, it's not necessary to tune anything. As a matter of fact, you can probably make it even smaller. You can also turn off progressive search if that's not a behavior or it's confusing behavior for your audience. And you can turn on some things which are on by default, like the search result count and the search scope filtering. Okay, toolbar. This is, again, as before, you could turn on the Google Translate button, and you can specify, do you want logo to show up in the toolbar? So in this case, when you have it in the wide layout, you can see a company logo, and that's actually pretty common for users to put the logo up there on the toolbar now. So that's another 2.0 advantage. Under the WebWorks Reverb menu, what I want to show you here is the skin setting. So we have several skins that are now available. We don't have all the variations in sizes, and the reason that is because you can now customize the sizing very easily after selecting a plugin. The default plugin is Neo, so if you're going to use Neo, you really don't need to set it, and it's probably a good idea not to set it if you're using Neo. But for completeness, we put it in there. We have the social, metro, corporate, and classic skins. You can set those, and what the skins are is they're just prepackaged customizations that have already been done for you. So if you know you're going to customize pretty much from scratch, it's probably best not to use a plugin, because you're basically going to be maintaining both the plugin and your settings, and probably in the long term you'd be better off just leaving this blank. But if you want a way to get out the door quickly, or if you like the prepackaged skins because you're using them in Reverb 1, then there's no problem using a skin. You just have to have one caveat. If you use a plugin, you want to make sure all your customizations to the CSS files use target customizations. I'm going to give a 20-second break here just to make sure there's not a question over just what I went over before I go to the next step. Okay, very good. So now let's come back to the Advanced tab. We've done all the work we can do using target settings and target options, target properties. Now we want to get to the meat of what's going on. Pretty much with Reverb, we allow you to go to whatever degree is necessary to get the look and feel you want. But with Reverb 2, we've done a lot of work to try to reduce the amount of work that you have to do. So the way we've done this is with what we call the Advanced Customization tab. And if you open up that tab, you'll see that it kind of gives you a layout of the project structure. So these folders, they don't exist in the project folder yet, but when I create a customization, a copy of them will be put there for you to edit. But before we do that, let's go ahead and configure the tools that could be used to make this customization a little bit easier. You can specify your editor of choice. By default, we just use the editor that you have associated with your file types, but you can override this and specify an editor like Notepad++ or whatever suits your fancy. But very importantly, you'll want to also configure a Diff tool. These are things like our Axis Merge, Windows Beyond Compare, or Windows WinMerge. And there's several of these available now that you can download freely. The Axis Merge is what I use because it does a really good job of laying out the comparisons. Makes your job a little easier. It's reasonably priced, but there's lots of choices. So really, to set this up, all you need to do is navigate to where your Diff Tools executable is and select it. And chances are the default settings we provided here, where we run the Diff program followed by the base file, followed by the override file. That's pretty much set up. But if you have some kind of specialized Diff tool, you can change these values. So once you have your Diff tool set up, you're now ready not only to edit content, but to maintain it. And if you're upgrading Reverb 2 from a prior release, you'll want to be sure to watch a video that's included in the docs on the what's new section at the bottom. You can look at that video briefly to get some pointers on how to use, how to review just what I showed you, but also how to pull in the changes that have been added to the latest release of ePublisher. Okay, so in this layout, what we see here are ASP extension files. And so what these are like HTML template files. They are basically the skeleton of the structure that's going to be generated. And so the most important ones of these files are like the page.asp. This is the template file for your content area. And the connect.asp is the template file for your toolbar and menu area. The footer.asp is a special template file that's now available for just the footer. And the header.asp is one just for the header. So these can make editing or adding a footer or a header much simpler because you're only worried about the header and the footer. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next step. The other area that you'll want to customize, and the page.asp, it's pretty common to customize that because very often you'll want to add some little piece of content. Maybe you want to add another link at the top of the page to something that's relevant to your business or organization. And so very common to override the page.asp. It's also very common to override the Sass files. The Sass files are broken up just like Reverb 1. They look very similar. The only difference is they're using Sass technology where possible. So Sass is kind of a superset of CSS. So you don't have to, the amount of what you have to learn new to use Sass is very little. Still the key ingredient is understanding a little bit about CSS and how it works, and you'll be fine. But what we've done with Reverb 2 is we've created these files that have an underscore at the beginning, and what they do is they basically package a whole bunch of settings in one place. So if you want to customize the colors, which almost everybody's going to want to customize the colors because they're going to want to put in the corporate colors. So let's start with the colors. So really all I have to do to customize the skin is to create a customization of the colors CSS file and then edit that. So what's nice here is the way this file is laid out. It's kind of a top-down organization. So at the very top are my theme color values. So I can basically set these color values, and you'll see that they'll propagate throughout the entire output. And so what that means is I can set one color and it will show up in many, many places. And that really reduces the amount of work you have to do. So really the first step in customizing your skin is look at these colors at the top of the file and set them at, and try setting them and just generate and see how it looks. So for example, if I look at the output currently, we'll see that it's got the blue. Well, there's the Neo main color is blue. And you can see the tertiary, or the main text color is black. And so that's picking up, or any text that might show up in the toolbar or in skin areas will be black. And then we've got, background colors and different things. And these are well documented in the documentation. I'm going to show you where those links are. And they're also part of the slide so that you can go back and look at it. But, one of the things you can do, you can start seeing results by just coming into this file, and we can quickly change it. And so I can save it. Oh. I already saved it, and now I can come over here and regenerate. And we'll see that by changing one variable, I can do a lot of work. And so that's kind of the first step you should think about as well. Okay, I want to try to just change one variable and do a lot of work. And so now, obviously the toolbar's changed, but it's more than just the toolbar. Notice how I now have, the highlight of what's been selected is now using that same color. And again, I can make that. But the other thing you can do is you can start to go down the hierarchy and see that by doing a search, you will find that that particular variable, let's try. So then we have another set of variables, and these are also documented, and these are actually more relevant because all of the skins use these layout colors, whereas only the Neo skin uses these Neo variables. So that the Neo colors come down, they set the layout, and then the layout colors are used throughout the content. Like you can see, for the default link color is specified by the layout color. The layout color 1, that is, because there's several layouts. And also to make your life a little bit easier, because the nuance is very high. So that means that you have a default link color, but you also have a visited color and an active color. So these are little subtle things that can hint to your end users what they've already looked at. And so rather than trying to figure out all the different colors that you might want to use, you could simply use a little handy Sass function called darken or lighten that we've created, that allows you to take the color and darken it by 20% or lighten it by any value you want, actually. So you could actually do some of these tricks to also speed up the time of design. And so you'll notice that you can also put real values anywhere you want in this file. But again, the first place to start with your colors is to look at this file and identify components that by name that need to be modified. Okay, then there's a very strict naming convention. Obviously, things that are part of the toolbar are going to begin with a toolbar. And if I go down, different menu items are going to begin with menu, and so on, down to the page. Page has its own toolbar, so it has a prefix. So once you get comfortable with the prefix, this will get a little bit easier. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's take a look at, and there's some links embedded in this slide presentation, and these are kind of like for something to go look at when you're done, to kind of review and give you some ideas, but these links will back up what I'm getting ready to show you. But first, let's start with this one link, customizing skin workflow. This is a really good place to start. So this pulls up a section of the documentation that has a topic on pretty much every aspect that we're getting ready to go over. So I want to direct you on some things that are real useful to know. First of all, there's a description of what each one of these ASP files does, in case you need a reminder, or you have a subtlety like, hey, I want to change the splash page. There's also a description of each one of these Sass underscore files. So like borders, if you want to change anything that has to do with a border, like the borders on your toolbar buttons, well, the borders file is a good place to start. We've already looked at the colors. Another important area is the fonts area. So you may want to put in a corporate font. You can do that in that one place. Icons, this gets a little bit more advanced, but if you are into not creating custom icons, but if you want to change to a different icon or add a different icon, you could do that. We're using these standard icons for like the menu, but there are other icons that you can look up and change that to the arrow icons. You might want to change that, or the home button, and so on. So you can actually literally change out the icon by changing one code. It's pretty well documented, so I'm not going to go over that now. And then sizes, this is another important file. So if you want to change the size of the buttons, you can do that very easily by going into this file. And then finally, if you can't solve the problem, or not problem, or if you can't get the effect that you're looking for by working with these underscore files, you can certainly customize these other files, like the skin.scss. Probably the most customized file, that in WebWorks.scss, because there you can go in and you can even add your own CSS code. The caveat with that is that it may make upgrading a little bit more complex as you go to the new releases, because you're going to want to get the functionality. With these underscore files, we've tried to have in mind the life cycle of the actual project itself to make it easier. Okay. Another useful page is this little layout that shows you where things are organized in the skin. So with these little numbers show you, hey, if you want to do something regarding the menu, what are those prefixes? Or the toolbar itself, toolbar underscore. And so if you want to do something with table of contents or the menu area, then we got menu, and so on. Every area is labeled here to kind of give you a jump start on the naming conventions. This is useful to know about simply if you're going to be migrating your Sass overrides. If you ever get an error like this, usually this means that there were some migrations that you didn't pull over, some new things that you didn't pull over into your overridden file. So anything that you override, you kind of take ownership of. So by overriding this colors file, I now own it. So if I want to get the new stuff, I'm going to need to use this view file differences. And what that does is that allows me to compare the original shipped version. You can notice how it's coming out of the installation area, and it shows the version of that file. And so I can now see how my content changed. And often, if you're just changing something like a variable, you don't need to annotate it. But if you're going to actually add CSS code into these files, it's very useful to do something like a comment, maybe the name of your organization or your initials. And the reason that is because now you know that you put that there. It's not part of the original stock. And that way, when you do migrations in the future, you'll be able to see what code you have put in there, and you won't lose it.
Hey, Tony, you're about the 5-minute mark.
Okay, last thing I wanted to show you is once you know, once you've identified the layouts, you can actually see what variables the layouts apply to. And this has actually been set up for all the different skins. So this is another nice, useful page. And to finish things off, I want to show you something that is also important. When all else fails, and so you don't get frustrated, you can very easily find things also by using the browser's inspection tool. So let's say if I have a piece of content like this, what's this helpful? And you've forgotten what variable that is, and you don't really feel like looking it up. Well, you can give yourself a big hint by using the inspection tool. And the inspection tool will show you the class name that's being used. So WWScan was this helpful message. So now you can take this particular value and you can copy it, and you can come over to your CSS file and you can try to find it. Now, I don't think it's going to be in this colors file. Where will it be? Well, it's probably going to be in the either the WebWorks or the skin file. So what I would do there is you can temporarily create a customization of that file, if for no other reason than just to search it. And let's see, did I find it? Yeah, so here it is. I found there was this helpful message. So now I can see if I wanted to change the font family, or if I wanted to see where it was getting its color from, you can see right here, it's getting its color from the variable called page helpful message Texas. So I can take this value and I can go back to the colors file, find that color, and I can either change the color right here if I know what color I want to make it, or if necessary, I could actually make the change right here, so long as I just understand that I'm changing a file that's probably going to change in the future. And that's okay. That's why we have the Diff tool. Okay, well, I will pause here, and so you can put in a few questions and that we can wrap this up. Just let you know, we have study hall where we can get real deep into your challenges with customizing things. That's twice a month. Be sure to sign up on our list so we can send you the links to the meeting. We also have videos that we're adding constantly to the website, and we have our technical support staff that would be glad to assist you if you have challenges as well or questions. And the slide share will give you another starting point to look at the links to read some of the pertinent docs related to Reverb 2.0. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
All right, thank you everyone thank you, Tony, for the presentation. Thank you everybody for attending. Like I said, I've got you on the list. So after this email, once the video is ready, I will be sending it out with links to the video and links to the slide deck.